We are now streaming. We are seeing that. There's no audio yet.
What entity you need to use, because that's how you relate everything together.
Well, why don't I kick the get the show on the road?
So attribute
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Winslow. Welcome to the World Constellation for another of the spring's Twed Talks. Today, it's our grad student, Sabbir Rashid. Just a couple logistical notes. There's a couple logistical notes, the usual things. Remember that this talk is being streamed and recorded tonight. Today we're going to do things slightly different. There's after Sabbir's slides, there's a short demo, but for various reasons, we're going to cut the broadcast. So if you're watching on the interweb, we're going to cut the video stream at that point. But it's the usual thing about this being work in progress, publication, all sorts of issues, but it's not an issue. All right. Remember to sign up for your Twed Lightning Talk for the end of the term. Many of you have already signed up. Thank you very much. Some of you haven't. Get on it. Get that choice spot. Who has already signed up for Twed Lightning Talks? Katie's the only one.
I might be.
I think you were. Yeah, actually, I think you were.
Okay, we have 3 gold stars.
That's right. Once again, the McGinnis group is in the lead as far as sign-ups go. It's always good to see. All right, so this is semi-formal in the sense that Sabbir's worked hard to put these slides together, but he also welcomes questions. We're going to bring it in an hour. So take it away, Sabbir.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sabbir Rashid. So this presentation is related to the CHEAR project that is part of TWC, and it mostly touches upon on what are some of the things we consider when we're building the CHEAR ontology. Sure. Right. So CHEAR stands for Childhood Health Exposure Analysis Research. Repository.
Or resource. Yeah.
Resource, right. So it relates to
Actually, it's child health. No, child health. Yeah.
right. So as the name kind of implies, it relates to how does the environment or even demographics that a child is exposed to affect their health, and how can we use that to predict certain diseases or come up with solutions to some of the pressing problems. And this is an NIH-funded project. So before I begin, just some acknowledgements. You might see your name here. So these are some people from our. You did?
Mm-hmm.
You still not have it?
I do it from there. That's good to share.
I mean, I could share the slides directly.
I need to. You have to share them through.
So let me actually.
Do that. Do exactly that.
Then I'll do share the slides.
Yeah. Perfect. Yep.
And you're seeing the slides on Hangouts?
Yeah, but I'm seeing that you're showing them up there, so you need to.
Yeah. So, all set?
Had them, and then I'm giving them away.
Something about from this screen.
Is the Hangout link in your announcement?
The stream was.
Yeah, the stream
The
is.
stream was.
Just share the desktop. Actually.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's perfect. So far, so good. Beautiful,
still good.
Yep.
All right. So
beautiful.
just some acknowledgements from RPI. We're also working with Mount Sinai School of Medicine and the Mount Sinai Health System. So these are some acknowledgements from some of the members that we're working with. Some more. All right, so today I'll quickly go over some of the foundational ontologies that we're importing into CHEAR, and I'll talk a little bit about SIO, PROV, and KEBI. Then I'll go into some of the considerations that go into the ontology design aspects, including a schema, a few pictures of the process, and then I'll talk a little bit about pilot proposals, and then I'll discuss a specific use case related to an analyst who wants to use CHEAR to find similar birth cohort studies based on certain indicators or analytes. All right, so some of the motivations for the CHEAR research is to expand the number of studies that include environmental exposure, and to implement exposum, which is health-related exposures of an individual throughout their lifetime in these studies. But what we're more concerned with are the last 2 points, where we're working on creating a public resource of childhood exposure across the country, as well as developing data and metadata standards for the environmental health community. So some of the foundational ontologies that we're using are SIO, which we're rooting our ontology in, PROV, Pasco Pezinetto, which is ontology related to sensors and networks, and kind of expanding on that, the STOI, which includes analytical instruments. And then we're using the units ontology, KEBI for chemical interests, chemical elements and analytes, Uberon for anatomy concept like whole blood or urine, which comes up a lot in questionnaires in lab results, and SCOS. So some additional ontologies that we're exploring, but we haven't quite gone too in depth with, are the exposure ontology, disease ontology, and gene ontology. However, future work may incorporate some of these. We're also, we started using UniProt for protein-related concepts, yes?
So besides properties, where are we using SCOS?
We're using SCOS definition and SCOS editorial now.
So we're not using that. I don't think, so we are.
So we're not really using prop for things other than properties as well, right? So I just included.
Yeah. Okay. I would move disease ontology over this list too.
Okay. Right. I just put it on the second list because we haven't gone to.
Well, we've actually used classes from that, like those other two.
Okay. Right. So additional resources we're using include PubMed, PubChem, and NPS. So I have some pictures as well as these slides. There's like, so for those of you who can't really see this, this is a bubble diagram of the SIO ontology. So it pretty much looks at word occurrences and creates this visualization. What's kind of important here are things like entity, relation, process, which is kind of the key thing that SIO contributes to us. We're rooting our ontology in SIO, so everything falls under the root concept of SIO, which is entity, and from there you have processes, entities, and relations.
So that's actually a subclass diagram, right? Or is it actually just a word mention diagram?
Yeah, it looks like it's a word cloud.
Yeah, I think it's a word,
Oh, it's
So
just a
just
word
they
cloud?
went through all the definitions and labels and
and counted the number of
Okay.
occurrences. Right. So here's a similar diagram for PROV. So PROV, as the name might suggest, is related to the provenance. So we're using PROV for things like how was a certain concept generated, or what's associated with that concept. We're also using KEBI for analytes in biological quantities. We're using it for metals and like phthalates and different stuff that relates to analytes that might appear in the blood or a urine sample. So this is just a depiction. So here's an example of some predicates that might appear in a CHEAR attribute. So when we're creating terms, to fully express those terms, we might use these predicates. So first and foremost, we'll have the term be a subclass of a concept that's either part of the CHEAR ontology or part of one of the ontologies that we're importing. And then we add things like labels, comments. If the concept has units, then we'll add that measurement. We have different ways to do descriptions, including DC terms descriptions or Scots definitions. We also have, we're also using Scots for editorial notes. So if someone is making changes to the ontology, they can document specifically what changes they made. Similarly, we have terms like Haskell needs approval and Haskell approved by for the case where someone's editing the ontology. So this kind of schema for attributes and concepts that we'll add to the ontology allows for both the provenance to be expressed, the notes from the editor to be expressed, and things like where that class fits into the hierarchy. So this is a diagram of part of the design process. This is actually an early diagram. So it includes EXO, which we're not quite using. We're not sure we're using limbs. In any case, you have existing vocab and infrastructure where we compare terms in pilot proposals or use cases to see if those terms should be incorporated into the ontology. And like I mentioned in the acknowledgement slides, we're working closely with Mount Sinai School of Medicine, and they house the CHEAR data center. So there's some process between how the data gets to us. But before we even get the data, we get things like code books and data dictionaries, which I'll talk a little bit about. So just a quick glance at what a concept might look like. This is a hierarchy of birth outcomes. And I have these figures so I can share it with you guys afterwards if you want to take a closer look. But so something like C-section or preterm birth body length would come up as a birth outcome. We also have a lot of demographics, such as education level, characteristics about the household, which we go further into, screening age, child sex, are you married or not, when's your date of birth, and your race. So the reason we create this tree of demographics is because our data comes in two forms mainly, either questionnaires or lab results. And questionnaires asks questions related to demographics, like did you smoke while you were pregnant, type of thing. And just a quick just a third example of a hierarchy. So these are household characteristics, which also appear from touch groups. So how do we begin building this ontology? How do we know what terms will include into this? What motivates a certain topic to be studied? So what happens is certain principal investigators interested in childhood health related studies send proposals to the coordinating center, which is also at MSSM. And then we begin thinking about what concepts appear in these proposals and do they already exist in our ontology? Do we have to add them? And this is also good for testing infrastructure. So doors are just opening, meaning the actual studies that we'll be getting from people who propose their research to CHEAR are just coming in. But in order for us to test the infrastructure and start building the ontology, before that, we had pilot proposals, which kind of gave us an idea of what sort of concepts might be there. So here's some examples of the pilot proposals that we received. There were 4 main pilot proposals. One had to do with EOE, which is a disease related to the esophagus. It has to do with a person's, I want to say immune system. In any case, that study had some concepts such as demographics, medical history, and targeted analysis, as well as others. Another study had to do with metal and birth weight. Actually, most of the studies we got related to analyze or metals and how they affect birth. So that's what the 3 bottom studies are. But they had different concepts in them. They all had, 2 of them from this list had anthropometry, but they all have demographic characteristics. That study talked about, do you smoke when you were pregnant? Did you smoke before? Did you quit? But all 3 of these studies have analytes in them as well. So why do we care? So this is just some survey of what a certain population thought were a problem with children's health, and some of these things actually come up in our ontology, such as stress, alcohol abuse, pregnancy characteristics, drug abuse, smoking. We haven't really gone into obesity too much, but that could be a use case that we explore. So some topics of interest, and the first one is what I'll present the use case on, which is combining of birth cohort studies based on birth outcomes or analytes. But there's other potential topics that people could propose, including exposures and symptoms relation, how are phthalates and body size measure related? What about exposure data with genomic data? Is there a relation there? Does your environment affect your genes in any way? And then how do you combine these exposure related studies? The last one in particular, how do exposures relate to certain diseases? All right, so I'll talk about the first one, which has to do with how can I, as a data analyst, retrieve all the birth cohort studies in my system that have a certain birth outcome, like birth weight or APGAR score, in order for me to assess the impacts on children's health. So this study was proposed by one of the data analysts at MSSM, Chris Jennings, and the goal was to evaluate the characteristics of disparate studies. So the demo I'll show in about 20 minutes or so will directly relate to how can someone like a data analyst get this information. So related to this use case are some competency questions. So how can the data be combined in order to assess the impacts? How does the presence of certain chemicals in the blood affect birth outcomes of the child? Do the demographics, qualities of the parents make any difference? Do parents with more extreme prenatal, do children with more extreme prenatal exposures have later adverse effects? So these are the type of questions that people in health informatics may be interested in, and they're kind of the group that we're creating this ontology for in a way.
By competency, do we mean like the suitability of the data?
How do we evaluate success? So can we answer the combined birth cohort data can be used to access? So basically, yeah, do we have the right data to be able to answer that question?
It's like a sufficiency.
It's really, how are you evaluating your application? So actually some of these are not really great competency questions. This is more, is the data suitable? True competency questions are whether your application
So it's competency relative to fulfilling the use case.
right.
Oh,
Right, so I guess these aren't really competency questions. These are more so questions that the ontology might have answered.
Well, so you could make more concrete competency questions out of some of these, like presence of certain mixtures of chemicals, and pick some particular birth outcomes, birth weight or Fenton weighted Z-score or something. So be able to answer the impact of exposure to a certain mixture of chemical and certain birth outcomes.
Right. So next I have a few diagrams. I'm not going to go through this. This is pretty much what are the steps the data analyst might take, which includes, so before the data analyst goes into the system, someone has to upload the data into the system and make it accessible to the analyst. And then the data analyst will go in and search for the data and download studies that are of interest to the analyst. And then afterwards, they'll use that downloaded data to assess the effects. Right, so I have two images coming up. So I'll actually share the actual images because you can't quite.
Yeah, you can't read that, even in the front row.
Right, so.
I just lost you.
Yeah.
Sure. Came back.
Right. So we're looking through the support process. You still sure?
You're good.
So this is kind of what we were just talking about in that flow table. So you have the data owner imports the questionnaire data. So this diagram kind of asks, are everything in the steps of the use case going as you intend, and if not, what happens? So if you look down here, there's a lot of the concepts result in the support team receiving notifications where they can then resolve the issue. So just going quickly through here, data owner uploads the data, and then the data is stored in the database. Did the data owner assign access levels? If not, set a reminder for the data owner to assign access levels. If so, is the data accessible by the data analyst? Meaning, does the data analyst have permissions to view this data? If the data analyst does, then alert the data analyst that there's new data in the system. So then the data analyst logs into the system. Is the data analyst able to get into the system? If not, send a support message. If so, the data analyst then should be able to visit the faceted browser and view existing birth cohort studies. Are the facets selectable? Yes, no. If not, send a support message. If so, then the data analyst can select birth outcome facets that they're interested in, such as birth weight. So once they select the facet, how many studies remain? If there's fewer than the total number of studies, that means not all of the studies have birth weight, which is fine. So the data analyst can actually select as many facets as they want and then download the combined results and then perform analysis. So somewhat flow of events. Yes, Hannah?
Yeah, so it seems like it is a flow from start to finish, but like it seems like you can enter at multiple points. Does this allow for that? Because imagine I upload something and I didn't have the correct notifications or something like that, and I essentially exited the system, but I corrected them when I start there. So does your flow allow for getting in on like the middle?
Right, so the way HADatAc works actually is and HADatAc is the human aware data acquisition framework, which is what I'll be demoing. The way it works is that if you don't have permission to view a certain data set, that data set doesn't even show up, right? So if the data owner, for example, uploaded data but didn't assign permissions to anyone, no one else will know that data is in the system until the data analyst, until the data owner gives those permissions, and then the analyst will be notified.
That wasn't the question. The question was, data analyst enters this workflow and gets part way through and then leaves. Can they resume?
Yeah, that's basically it.
Well, can they resume?
Can they like enter back into any part of this workflow and still have it give good outcomes?
Is it re-entry? How's the state? I guess another way is state maintained.
I don't think it saves like the queries. We could, but I don't think we do that.
So if the data owner physically uploads the CSV, right? That CSV is in the system. So if auto annotation is turned on, even if the data owner leaves the system after uploading the CSV, the system itself will annotate the data and put it into the database, right? So then that data will be in there. And so say the data owner left before even assigning any permissions, right? So only the data owner would be able to view the data, but they won't have to re-upload the data to then assign permissions.
So that's the data owner part of the workflow. But how about the data analyst part of the workflow? The question is, so much of this is data analysts working through the workflow, trying to configure their, selecting facets, doing this, kind of hone in on the data set that they want to download.
Right.
Okay.
So,
well, what if they get interrupted? Can they resume where they are? Or does data analysts sort of have to start at ground zero of the data analysts part of the workflow?
right. So, yes to both of those, in the sense that the data analyst isn't changing the state of the system, right? So, the state of the system remains the same regardless of where along the workflow the data analyst is. So, if they visited the faceted browser page and start selecting facets and then close out of the system, they'd have to go back in and log in again and then go to the faceted page again and select those facets again. That part of the workflow isn't saved. The data owner, however, is making changes to the state of the system, which do get saved. So I'll show you guys another diagram before I go back to the slides, which might illustrate this point. Right, so on the left here, you have the data analyst, and on the right, you have the data owners. So this is kind of a simplified picture where the data owners are uploading different kinds of data. Say this one's uploading lab results, this one, well, this is uploading both lab results from a certain study, and this one's just uploading questionnaire data, this one's just uploading lab results. All that data gets stored into some database. Up here we have the ontology designer, which is our team for the most part, as well as the epidemiologist in this case, or in general, the domain expert. So that would be someone like Jeanette from MSSM. So actually the ontology developer and the epidemiologist work together to maintain and review the ontology, which gets loaded into a RDF triple store. So over here you see the CHEAR ontology as well as external ontologies, which were some of the supporting ontologies I mentioned in the beginning. So that's kind of the precondition to the data analyst role, who logs into the system through the web portal and uses that to access a faceted study browser and then select certain facets. So what's kind of going on in the background is that there's some semantic data annotation process, which right now is done partially manually, partially automated, but in the future it may be fully automated. That takes the data collection and the ontology and kind of connects the concepts that go together. So is the certain variable a birth weight variable? If so, tag it with birth weight, and then when the data analyst searches for studies that have birth weight, that data will show up.
And you're going to give a demo of at least the faceted study browser.
Right, so I'll talk about how we can do this, and I'll talk about how we can do this, but I won't change the system because I don't want to break anything. But I'll go through the data analysts. Okay, so can go back to the slides. Can you confirm, John, that everything's
You're fine.
And can you see Naomi and Mohammed? They said they were joining.
Well, I can't see who's on the
Oh,
screen.
you can't see. Okay.
They're not in the hangout.
right. So we just went over the support process. The system I was talking about is HADatAc, which stands for Human Aware Data Collection Framework. So it's a framework that allows us to store data, to load in ontologies, and then use the combination of ontologies and data to annotate the data in such a way that will be useful to someone who is either on the ontology side, hoping to manage an ontology or view the contents of an ontology, or from an analyst side to find studies that correspond to topics of interest. And this is the system diagram that I just described. And it's at this point where I do my demo. I censored out some stuff, but before I go to the demo, I'll just go to some future directions. So I briefly discussed code books and data dictionaries, which I have some examples I can show you guys after. But one of the directions we're going is this idea of a semantic data dictionary, where we'd be able to generate pretty much the RDF graph directly from the data dictionary. So just to give you guys an idea of what a data dictionary is. You guess also what a code book is. So a data dictionary is pretty much a table that has the variable as it appears in the study. I don't really know the match for
Command plus.
Command plus. Let me just
Did you zoom on these maps?
Well,
Can't on Linux machines.
Yeah, maybe something about how it was saved as an XLX is not allowing me to do it.
I'm not sure why you're using TF. I've never used preview to open a spreadsheet.
Oh, that might be it too.
That's where we want.
This is the way we browse them, Mac.
I don't really use Mac that often, to be honest.
Why are you using that?
Because my other computer makes too much noise.
Well, he also has no software on this now.
Well, I think it's borrowed Mac. It's
Right, yeah. So I really don't use it so much. But anyways, the basic idea is that the data dictionary contains the variables as they appear in the study and some description of that variable. And maybe it'll contain the units or the type they are, but for the most part, for the data dictionaries we got, it's very sparse and they leave a lot of this stuff out. So what also comes with this is a code book, which contains the variables in the data dictionary as well as what are their possible values. So 0 means there was no pregnancy complication and 1 means yes. Or you can have different marital statuses, high school education levels, smoking statuses. So the code book encodes the possible values a data point might take. So one of the directions we're working on is a semantic data dictionary, which kind of contains these ideas, but it also contains the necessary information we need to directly map these to RDF triples. So that's an example. Other future directions include updates to the framework and ontology. So those are actually ongoing tasks that'll probably never end, where it's an iterative process where we have different versions of the ontology that evolves by both the community input and the needs of the studies that we get.
How do you enumerate the different values? I see how you're doing the column here, but I mean sort of the definition of the variable. But how are you associating that to the potential values or codes for them? How do you relate a code to the not the human definition of the code?
Also, we do it through the ontology. So they have a so there are labels and descriptions in so it's column label definition, which is kind of standard for
Right.
So that's kind of like the direct reference. But what you get with this is that you actually get the things like you get the for columns that map to attributes. There's the attribute column. You put in the URI for the class that it corresponds to.
Right.
And then you say something. So the next column, attribute of, is what does this belong to? So if it's just a subject, you actually create a virtual column with 2 question marks. And you call it subject. And you add that as a row in there, and you say question mark subject, the attribute of, and then you say things about the subject in there, like what the type is. You do that in the entity column. You can see that there. You can interrelate different entities together using roles, relations, and the in relation to is to say, well, this role goes from this thing to this other thing. And so what you end up with is basically the deeper graph of information about it rather than just the table. And since everything kind of compounds down to ontology terms, usually you don't have to add anything new. And but the nice thing about this approach is that you have a lot of the same things that you would see in an actual ontology if you're relating attributes together, for instance. And so you could actually write an ontology in this. But
Okay.
but the general benefit is that you have columns with column names, and then you have the structure that maps into that's general purpose. And so what Katie's been working on is to basically compile that down to a settle file. So she has a script that creates a settle file specific to this, to a particular semantic data dictionary that can be run on the data set that creates the RDF.
So,
And for those who can't really see it,
but I'm not thinking that answers my sort of detailed question about the code book specifically.
This code book part,
Yeah,
you
the
can
code
show you
book.
the code book.
Yeah. So that was a huge answer to the data dictionary
that
part.
was
That makes total sense. No, and thank you for that. It's the code book aspect, which I'm kind of curious about.
Right. The code book is actually fairly straightforward. It has, I'm pulling it up right now just so I can reference it.
You have some.
the code book looks similar to the initial code books that we get that I showed in.
So
Right.
yeah.
So you have the code book is basically you have the column that the code is for,
Yeah.
the value,
Yeah.
the class, and that's it. So basically, that's not the code book.
Yeah, this
This is a semantic data dictionary group.
So well, it's a little bit more readable than
Yeah.
before, but it's not the.
Right.
So in the world of ontology, we talk about class relationships and stuff like that. We don't usually talk about constraints and values, that aspect. But it's built in, obviously, but we don't usually see them in examples of that.
Right. Actually,
But this is what that code book aspect would be looking at.
Sorry, you don't
Yeah.
see examples of
Where you
what?
enumerate different, so a taxonomy that's associated with a particular property.
Okay, like
or in this
levels
case,
of education.
right, what are they? Or in this case, it's like we've got codes that represent this and
Right,
this
but
level and common
epidemiologists
names.
live by that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
Well, I know that's,
and so we basically say, for instance, educat new, there's 0, 1, 2, 3, which corresponds to high school or less and college or technical college graduate and advanced degree. And so those are basically qualities that map on. So if you look at educat new in this, the one I'm looking at is in the dictionary, the actual dictionary mapping, it will have kind of what this attribute is and where it goes in the relation to everything else. But then these are additional types that get tagged onto that attribute.
so in the instance graph, is the value what that code is, and then you gotta look up what it means.
Now,
So you tie that in also, you carry that with you.
well, so the value, so
So if it's 1, okay.
if it's 1, you can say SIO has value 1, but that's not useful.
Well,
Instead,
okay, so you do a replacement or?
no. The attribute object, it's multiple types. So there's education level, tier education level, but then also for 1, it would have tier some college or technical
Okay.
school.
And you'd be able to get back and know that that came from codebook XYZ.
Right.
And then further, you might be able to know that somebody else mapped those to be equivalent. Because actually on this, we went back to one of the principal investigators and said, how are you coming up with those numbers? And she gave us this like 3-sentence long description of how they came up with the numbers. So you might actually even get that.
So it's cool that you're objectifying it that way, so it's not just like, it's a simplistic approach would say the value is 1.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And then you have to go and look it up.
Exactly.
Like here you're doing this, I know I want,
Yeah, we're resolving it out.
right. Okay. So
Right, and you want to
You're-
support people
you
like
probably want to
Hannah,
support
you know, people, she's the representative data analyst.
Just a moment. Right, so just finishing up, additional directions that we're taking this is incorporating unit tests into the system, and also additional studies that are incoming. Originally open is going through the process to eventually get to us. We might explore some NLP methods to maybe automatically populate some things like a semantic data dictionary, or at least try. We're actually planning on deploying the system to the data center, so there's some work going on there, and of course we'll be publishing some of our results. And here's some references. And with that, I'll go to the demo and stop sharing.
Goodbye, Will.